The church was suffocating, the air thick with perfume and whispered judgment. Elena stood at the back, her heart pounding as she watched her sister, Sophie, trembling in her pew, her eyes fixed on the altar where their stepmother, Vivian, stood in a pristine white gown. Then it happened. A sharp crack echoed as Vivian's hand struck Sophie's face, silencing the murmurs and shattering the ceremony. Elena's breath caught. She felt the sting as if it were her own. Sophie, her fierce, radiant sister, crumpled under the weight of that public humiliation, her cheek red and her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The congregation froze, their gasps hanging in the air like a fog. Vivian, the bride, stood tall, her face a mask of cold fury, as if Sophie's mere presence at her wedding was an offense. Elena's hands clenched into fists. She'd promised herself she'd stay quiet, keep the peace for their fractured family, but that slap unraveled everything. She stepped forward, her boots echoing on the polished floor, and shouted, "Enough!" The word cut through the silence like a blade. Heads turned, eyes wide, as Elena strode down the aisle, her chestnut hair catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. She was 28, older than Sophie by 2 years, but in that moment she felt ancient, burdened by years of protecting her sister from their stepmother's cruelty. Sophie looked up, her blonde hair falling into her eyes, and Elena saw the flicker of hope in her sister's gaze. It was the same look Sophie had given her years ago, when they were teens whispering secrets under the stars, promising to always have each other's backs. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a battlefield, and Elena was done hiding who she was or who she loved. She reached Sophie, pulling her into a fierce embrace, shielding her from the stares. "You don't get to touch her," Elena said, her voice low and dangerous, directed at Vivian. The bride's lips curled into a sneer, but Elena didn't care. She was here for Sophie, for the sister who'd been her anchor, her confidant, and in ways she hadn't yet admitted to the world, her heart. The small town of Willow Creek, Virginia, wasn't ready for this. Nestled in the rolling hills, it was a place where tradition clung like ivy, where people smiled politely but whispered behind closed doors. Elena and Sophie had grown up here, under the weight of their father's death and Vivian's cold reign as their stepmother. Vivian, with her sharp cheekbones and sharper tongue, had married their father when Elena was 15 and Sophie 13. She'd never loved them, only tolerated them as extensions of her new status. When their father died 3 years later, Vivian's tolerance turned to disdain, especially for Sophie, who wore her rebellion like a badge, her short hair, her leather jackets, her refusal to conform. Elena, the quieter one, had tried to keep the peace. She worked as a librarian, her days filled with the soft rustle of pages and the comfort of routine. But Sophie was different. At 26 she was a wildfire, a painter who poured her soul onto canvases that no one in Willow Creek understood. Her art was bold, unapologetic, much like her love for women, a truth she'd shared with Elena late one night, her voice trembling but her eyes alight. Elena had held her, whispering, "I love you no matter what." But she hadn't confessed her own secret, the one that burned in her chest. She loved Sophie not just as a sister, but as something more, something forbidden in their small, judgmental town. The wedding was supposed to be Vivian's triumph. She was marrying Richard, a wealthy widower who owned half the town's real estate. The ceremony was a spectacle, with roses cascading down the altar and a string quartet playing softly. Sophie had been reluctant to attend, but Elena had convinced her, hoping it might mend the rift between them and Vivian. Now, as Elena stood protectively in front of Sophie, she realized her mistake. Vivian didn't want peace. She wanted control. "Why are you even here, Sophie?" Vivian spat, her voice carrying over the stunned congregation. "You're a disgrace. Always have been." Elena's blood boiled. She stepped closer, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You don't get to decide who she is, or who she loves." The words hung heavy, a challenge not just to Vivian but to everyone watching. Sophie's hand found Elena's, their fingers interlocking, and in that touch Elena felt the truth she'd been running from. She loved Sophie deeply, irrevocably, not as a sister, but as the woman who made her heart race, who filled her dreams with colors she couldn't name. The realization hit her like a wave, but there was no time to process it. The wedding was unraveling, and Elena was the one pulling the thread. The priest, an older man with a nervous cough, tried to intervene. Please, let's proceed with the ceremony. No, Elena said, her voice firm. This ends now. Richard, the groom, finally spoke, his face red with embarrassment. Vivian, what's going on? Who are these girls? They're my stepdaughters, Vivian said, her tone dripping with disdain. Ungrateful, both of them. Especially her. She pointed at Sophie, who flinched but didn't look away. Elena felt Sophie's grip tighten. She turned, meeting her sister's eyes, and saw the same fire she'd always admired. Sophie wasn't broken. She was bruised but unbroken, and Elena would be damned if she let Vivian hurt her again. We're leaving, Elena said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And you're not going to stop us. The congregation erupted into whispers, but Elena didn't care. She pulled Sophie toward the door, their hands still clasped, their steps echoing in unison. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the leaves a riot of red and gold. They stopped under a massive oak tree, its branches heavy with the weight of the season. Sophie's cheek was still red, but her eyes were fierce, searching Elena's face. Why did you do that? Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Elena interrupted. I'm done letting her hurt you. I'm done pretending. Sophie's breath hitched. Pretending what? Elena's heart pounded. This was the moment, the edge of a cliff she'd been standing on for years. She could step back, keep things safe, or she could jump. Pretending I don't love you, she said, her voice breaking. Not just as my sister. Everything. Sophie's eyes widened, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then she stepped closer, her hand brushing Elena's cheek, and the space between them vanished. Their lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, a kiss that tasted of tears and truth. It was wrong, forbidden, but it was theirs, and in that moment nothing else mattered. They pulled apart, breathless, their foreheads touching. What do we do now? Sophie whispered. Elena didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing. They were in this together. The town would talk, Vivian would rage, but they had each other. And that was enough for now. The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Elena and Sophie walked hand in hand down the quiet streets. The weight of the church scene clung to them, but so did the electricity of their kiss, a secret now shared but still fragile. They didn't speak, not yet. The silence between them was heavy with possibility and fear. They reached Sophie's small apartment above the town's only coffee shop, a cramped space filled with half-finished canvases and the faint smell of paint. Elena sat on the worn couch, watching as Sophie paced, her leather jacket discarded on a chair. They're going to hate us, Sophie said finally, her voice low. This town. They'll never understand. Elena stood, crossing the room to cup Sophie's face. Let them hate us. We don't owe them anything. Her words were fierce, but inside she was terrified. Willow Creek was all they'd ever known. A place where everyone knew your name and your sins. Coming out as sisters who loved each other in a way that defied every rule, it was a scandal that could burn their lives to the ground. Sophie leaned into Elena's touch, her eyes searching. You meant it, didn't you? What you said outside the church. Every word, Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. She'd spent years burying her feelings, telling herself it was just sisterly devotion, that the way her pulse raced when Sophie smiled was normal. But it wasn't. It was love, raw and undeniable, and now that she'd said it aloud, there was no going back. They sat together, their hands entwined, and Sophie began to talk. She told Elena about the years of feeling like an outsider, of Vivian's constant criticism, of the way she poured her pain into her art. I painted you once, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. It's in the back under a sheet. I was too scared to show you. Elena's heart skipped. Show me. Sophie hesitated, then led her to a corner of the room where a canvas was hidden beneath a cloth. She pulled it away, revealing a painting of Elena, her face soft and glowing, surrounded by a swirl of autumn leaves. It was breathtaking, intimate, as if Sophie had captured her soul. This is how I see you, Sophie said, her voice barely audible. Always have. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her. Instead, she kissed Sophie again, slower this time, savoring the warmth of her lips, the way their breaths mingled. It was a moment of peace in a storm they both knew was coming. The The storm arrived sooner than expected. The next morning, Elena's phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, friends, even strangers. The news of the wedding's disruption had spread like wildfire, twisted into something uglier with each retelling. Did you hear? Those girls ruined Vivian's wedding. I always knew there was something off about them. By noon, a local gossip blog had posted a blurry photo of Elena and Sophie leaving the church, their hands clasped, with a headline that made Elena's stomach churn. Stepdaughter scandal rocks Willow Creek wedding. Sophie was at her easel when Elena showed her the post. Let them talk, Sophie said, her brush moving furiously across the canvas. They don't know us. But Elena couldn't shake the dread. She thought of their father, how he'd loved them fiercely, how he'd taught them to stand tall. He'd been gone 5 years now, and Vivian had erased every trace of him from their lives. This town, their home, was turning on them, and Elena wondered if they could survive it. That afternoon, they went to the library where Elena worked. She needed the comfort of its quiet shelves, the familiar scent of old books. But when they arrived, her boss, Mrs. Hargrove, was waiting, her face pinched. Elena, we need to talk, she said, her voice clipped. There's been concern about your behavior at the wedding. It wasn't my behavior, Elena snapped, her temper flaring. Vivian slapped Sophie. I stopped her. Mrs. Hargrove's lips thinned. People are talking, Elena, about you and Sophie. It's not appropriate for a librarian to be involved in such controversy. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. Are you firing me? Not yet, Mrs. Hargrove said. But I suggest you keep a low profile. Sophie, who'd been silent, stepped forward. She's not the problem. I am. Always have been, right? Her voice was sharp, but Elena saw the hurt in her eyes. They left the library, the weight of the town's judgment pressing harder. That night they sat on Sophie's balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, the stars above them a stark contrast to the darkness closing in. We could leave, Sophie said suddenly. Start over somewhere new. Somewhere they don't know us. Elena's heart ached at the thought. Leave Willow Creek? Leave the house where they'd grown up, the park where they played as kids? But as she looked at Sophie, her face illuminated by moonlight, she knew she'd follow her anywhere. Maybe, she said softly. But not yet. We're not running. Sophie smiled, a small fierce thing. Then we fight. The next week was a gauntlet. Willow Creek's whispers turned into outright stares, and Elena and Sophie couldn't walk down Main Street without feeling eyes on them. The gossip blog had dug deeper, unearthing old photos of Sophie at Pride events, speculating about their unnatural bond. Elena wanted to scream, to demand fairness, but she knew better. This town didn't care about truth. It cared about appearances. Vivian wasn't silent either. She'd taken to social media, painting herself as the victim, claiming Sophie had disrupted her wedding out of jealousy. She didn't mention the slap, of course, or the years of cruelty that had led to that moment. Elena read the post with growing fury, but Sophie just shrugged. Let her spin her story, she said. It's all she has. But Vivian's story had power. At the local diner where Elena and Sophie used to share milkshakes as kids, the owner asked them to leave, citing customer complaints. At the grocery store, a woman Elena had known since childhood turned away when they passed. The rejection stung, but Sophie's presence kept Elena grounded. They'd taken to holding hands everywhere, a quiet act of defiance, and each touch felt like a rebellion against the town's suffocating judgment. One evening they found refuge in the park, the same one where they'd shared their first kiss. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching under their feet. Sophie carried a sketchbook, her fingers smudged with charcoal as she drew the world around them. I want to paint this, she said, gesturing at the horizon. All of it. The good, the bad, the way it feels to be us right now. Elena watched her, marveling at her resilience. How do you do it? She asked. How do you keep going when they're tearing us apart? Sophie set her sketchbook down, her eyes soft. Because I have you. That's enough. They kissed again, hidden by the shadows of the trees, and for a moment the world felt right. But the moment shattered when a voice called out, You should be ashamed. It was Mrs. Carter, a church regular, her face twisted with disgust. This is a God-fearing town. Sophie spun around, her voice sharp. Then your God needs to learn some love. Mrs. Carter gasped and hurried away, but the encounter left them shaken. Elena felt the weight of their choice, the cost of their love. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe we should leave." Sophie shook her head. "Not yet. There's something I need to do first." The next day, Sophie revealed her plan. A public art exhibit. She'd been working on a series of paintings, each one a raw, vivid depiction of their lives' grief, love, defiance. "I want them to see us," she said. "Really see us. Not the gossip, not Vivian's lies. Us." Elena was skeptical. "You think art will change their minds?" "No," Sophie admitted. "But it'll make them feel something. And that's a start." They rented a small gallery space downtown, using Sophie's savings. Elena helped her set up, hanging canvases that told their story. Their father's funeral, Vivian's cold indifference, their own quiet moments of joy. The centerpiece was the painting of Elena, now titled My Truth. Sophie had added a new element, a silhouette of herself, holding Elena's hand, their figures outlined against a stormy sky. The exhibit opened on a rainy Saturday, and to Elena's surprise, people came. Some were curious, others hostile, but they came. Sophie stood by her paintings, unflinching, answering questions with a calm that Elena envied. When a man asked why she'd ruined Vivian's wedding, Sophie didn't flinch. "I didn't ruin it," she said. "I was defending myself. And Elena defended me." The crowd murmured, but Elena saw something shift in their eyes, curiosity, maybe even respect. Not everyone was convinced, but a few lingered, asking about the paintings, about Sophie's process. One woman, a teacher named Ms. Larson, bought a small canvas, her eyes misty. "This reminds me of my daughter," she said. "She's like you." That night, as they closed the gallery, Elena felt a spark of hope. "You were incredible," she told Sophie, pulling her close. "I'm so proud of you." Sophie smiled, but her eyes were distant. "It's not enough," she said. "Not yet." The exhibit changed something in Willow Creek, but not enough to stop Vivian. A week later, she filed a lawsuit against Sophie, claiming defamation and emotional distress. The news hit like a punch, and Elena felt the walls closing in. "She's doing this to destroy us," she told Sophie, pacing their childhood home, now half empty since Vivian had moved out. Sophie sat on the old couch, her hands clenched. "She's scared," she said. "She knows we're not backing down." The lawsuit was a public spectacle, with Vivian playing the grieving widow and wronged bride. She hired a slick lawyer from Richmond, who painted Sophie as a troubled rebel who'd targeted her stepmother out of spite. Elena sat in the courtroom, her heart in her throat as Sophie testified, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "She slapped me," Sophie said, her eyes locked on the judge. "In front of everyone. I didn't start this." Elena took the stand next, recounting years of Vivian's cruelty, the snide comments, the way she'd isolated them after their father's death. The lawyer tried to twist her words, suggesting she and Sophie were too close, but Elena didn't falter. "She's my sister," she said, her voice clear. "And I love her. I'll always protect her." The courtroom buzzed, and Elena felt Sophie's gaze on her, a lifeline in the chaos. The judge dismissed the case, citing lack of evidence, but the damage was done. The town's opinion was split. Some saw Vivian as the victim, others began to question her story. Elena and Sophie left the courthouse hand in hand, ignoring the cameras and whispers. But the victory was bittersweet. Elena lost her job at the library, the controversy too much for the town council. Sophie's art sales slowed, and their savings dwindled. They spent evenings planning their next move, torn between staying to fight and leaving for a fresh start. "I don't want to run," Sophie said one night, her voice fierce. "But I don't want to lose you to this place." Elena's heart ached. She thought of their father, how he'd tell them stories of big cities where people could be themselves. "Maybe it's not running," she said. "Maybe it's choosing us." They decided to visit Richmond, a city big enough to offer anonymity but close enough to feel like home. They rented a tiny apartment, and Sophie found a gallery interested in her work. Elena got a job at a bookstore, her days filled with the familiar comfort of books. For the first time, they could walk down the street holding hands without fear, kiss in a cafe without whispers. It wasn't perfect, money was tight, and the pain of Willow Creek lingered, but it was theirs. One night, as they lay in bed, Sophie traced circles on Elena's palm. Do you regret it? She asked. Standing up for me? Loving me? Elena turned to her, their faces inches apart. Never, she said, kissing her softly. You're my home. But Willow Creek wasn't done with them. A letter arrived from Vivian, forwarded from their old address. It was short, venomous. You think you've won, but you'll always be outcasts. Enclosed was a photo of their father's grave, defaced with red paint. Elena's hand shook as she showed it to Sophie, who went pale but didn't cry. We're going back, Sophie said, her voice hard. One last time. They drove back to Willow Creek under a gray sky, the weight of the defaced grave heavy between them. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, while Sophie stared out the window, her jaw set. This wasn't about Vivian anymore. It was about their father, their past, and the home they'd been forced to leave. They went straight to the cemetery, their boots sinking into the damp earth. The gravestone was worse than the foddered paint smeared across their father's name, ugly and deliberate. Elena knelt, her fingers tracing the letters, tears blurring her vision. Sophie stood beside her, her hand on Elena's shoulder, her silence louder than any words. We'll fix it, Elena said, her voice breaking. He deserves better. They spent the day cleaning the stone, scrubbing until their hands were raw. By dusk it was clean, the gray granite gleaming under the fading light. They sat by the grave, sharing memories of their father, his laugh, his stories, the way he'd loved them without condition. He'd be proud of us, Sophie said, her voice soft. For being us. Elena nodded, her heart full. He would. They didn't return to their old house or seek out Vivian. Instead, they went to the park, the place where their love had first taken shape. They sat on a bench, the autumn leaves falling around them, and Elena felt a peace she hadn't known in months. We don't belong here anymore, she said. But we'll always carry it with us. Sophie took her hand, her eyes bright. Then let's go build something new. They returned to Richmond, their resolve strengthened. Sophie's art began to sell, her bold, emotional paintings finding a home in galleries and private collections. Elena started writing, pouring their story into essays that resonated with others who'd felt like outsiders. They built a life together, not perfect but honest, filled with love and the quiet strength of knowing they'd chosen each other. Years later, they heard Vivian had left Willow Creek. Her marriage to Richard dissolved, her influence faded. The town itself began to change slowly with new faces and new ideas. Elena and Sophie visited once, invited to speak at a local pride event. They stood together, sharing their story, their hands clasped, their love a beacon for others. As they drove away, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror, Sophie turned to Elena. We did it, she said, her smile radiant. We made it through. Elena reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. And we're just getting started. Their love wasn't a scandal or a sin. It was a revolution, quiet but fierce, a testament to the power of standing up, of choosing truth over fear. They'd lost a home but found each other, and in that they'd found everything. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.